My parents kicked me out of the house on my 16th birthday for my pregnant sister, but they didn't expect how it would end for them. I turned 16 on an ordinary, gray Tuesday. The city was Yaroslavl. No snow, no sun. The off-season. Mud. Slush. Very symbolic, as it later turned out. I woke up before the alarm. This always happens when you're anxious inside, but you don't yet understand why. You lie there, staring at the ceiling, and feel something wrong. Not abruptly, not panicky, but quietly, like a draft. I knew it was my birthday. I was expecting at least a happy birthday. Not a gift. Not a cake. Not a celebration. Just a phrase. I thought even my parents couldn't ignore it. How wrong I was. I left the room around 8 in the morning. My mother was already in the kitchen. She was drinking coffee and scrolling through her phone. My father was sitting at the table, eating a sandwich. They talked among themselves. About ordinary things. About work. About some people I didn't know. I stood in the doorway for about 10 seconds. Then he said, "Good morning." Mom nodded without looking up. Dad muttered something. That's it. I waited. Nothing. I said, "I'm 16 today." There was a pause. The kind that made you want to sink into the floor. Mom said, "Oh, right. We'll talk later." Dad finished his tea and said he had to go. And he left. At that moment, I felt physically ill. Not dramatic. Just a feeling like someone had carefully erased you. With an eraser. No anger. No emotion. Just erased. I went to my room. It was the smallest in the apartment. 9 square meters. A bed. A table. A closet. Nothing extra. I sat on the bed and thought that maybe something would happen tonight. That I was worrying myself for nothing. I always did that. My whole life. I'd made excuses for them. I told myself they were just tired. That they had problems. That not all parents are supposed to be affectionate. That the most important thing was a roof over their heads. Around 10 in the morning, Mom knocked on the door. Not like usual. Not "may I," but short. Sharp. I immediately tensed. She said that Dad was waiting for me in the living room. I went out. They were sitting next to each other. It was strange. They never sat like that. Usually there was a table, the TV, or me between them. But here next to each other. Like at a meeting. Or an interrogation. Dad started talking. Slowly. With pauses. As if rehearsing. He said that changes were happening in the family. That my older sister, Alina, would be back soon. That she was in a difficult situation. That she was pregnant. That she needed support. That her boyfriend also needed space. That they had decided it would be best if I stayed with Aunt Ira, his sister. Temporarily. Until I came of age. They would help with money. Everything would be fine. It was just the way things worked out. I was silent. My head was buzzing. As if someone had turned on an old TV with no signal. I asked only one thing. Why today? My father looked away. My mother said that's how it happened. That I couldn't drag it out any longer. That I was already 16 and needed to be an adult. Adult. On my birthday. On the day I was kicked out of the house. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just nodded. That seemed to even please them. My mother immediately said she'd help me pack. She said it too cheerfully. Too businesslike. As if she'd been waiting for the right moment. We packed my things in bags from Pyataraka. I didn't have a suitcase. Alina had one. Because she needed it more. My mother folded them carefully. She'd comment that I didn't wear this anymore, and that could be thrown away. I watched and thought she was erasing me not only from the house, but from my memory as well. My father came by a couple of times and asked if I'd be finished soon. An hour later, everything was ready. 3 bags. My whole life. 16 years. In 3 bags. We were driving to Aunt Ira's. They were talking. Laughter. Joking. Mom said we could make a nursery now. Dad said it was long overdue. I looked out the window and counted the traffic lights. When we arrived, they didn't even get out. They just stopped. I got out. Got the bags. The car drove off without waiting for me to enter the building. Aunt Ira opened the door. She was surprised. She said she thought I wanted to stay with her. That Dad said it would be more comfortable for me. I couldn't take it anymore. I burst into tears. Right in the hallway. Loudly. Ugly. She hugged me, told me everything would be fine, and then she went to call my dad. And for the first time, I heard a grown man yell in anger at someone other than me. That day, I realized the most important thing. I wasn't suddenly kicked out. I hadn't been loved for a long time. It was just that now it was official. During the first few hours at Aunt Ira's, I felt like a stranger. Despite her best efforts, she gave me clean sheets, cleared out half the closet, said I could stay with her as long as I needed. But inside, I had a sense of temporariness, as if I was here by mistake. As if my father would come and say this was all a misunderstanding, and I needed to be taken back because I was, after all, their son. The thought was stupid, but it persisted. I lay on the couch and stared at the ceiling. A different ceiling. Alien. And I tried to understand what I was feeling. The pain was there, but not sharp. More like a dull, crushing ache. It made it hard to breathe, but it also kept me from screaming. I replayed the morning over and over again. How my mother said, "You have to be an adult." How my father didn't even look me in the eye. How they left without saying goodbye. And the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. They didn't think it was a bad thing. It was a convenient solution for them. They simply got me out of the way. Aunt Ira brought me tea. She sat down next to me. She said she'd talked to my father. She said he'd lied to her. He'd said it was me who wanted to move. That I was tired of the school so close to home. That I needed more freedom. She said it calmly, but I could see her hands shaking. I felt anger again. Not rage, but something cold, like ice under my skin. When my aunt went into the kitchen, I picked up my phone. I wasn't planning on writing a post. Honestly, I just opened the app. I just started typing. For myself first. Like a diary. I turned 16. Today my parents kicked me out of the house. The reason was my pregnant sister and her boyfriend. I didn't ask to move. They presented me with a fait accompli. On my birthday, I wrote without emotion. The calmer the words, the more terrifying they seemed. I wrote about bags. About how they helped me pack my things. About leaving without saying goodbye. About saying they'd pay me just so I wouldn't live with them. I wasn't accusing. I was just recording. When I finished, I stared at the screen for a long time. The publish button glowed. I knew there was no turning back after this. If I posted this, they'd find out. My family would find out. Everyone would see what had always been hidden. I was afraid. Very afraid. But even more afraid of keeping quiet again. Because if I closed the app now, it meant I'd agreed. It meant everything was okay. It meant this was okay with me. I pressed the button. I immediately turned off my phone. I really turned it off. Not blocked it. Completely. I needed at least an hour, without knowing what was happening. I sat and stared at the wall. I listened to Aunt Ira rattling the dishes in the kitchen. At some point, she asked if I wanted to eat. I didn't answer. I couldn't speak. An hour later, I turned on my phone. It started vibrating like crazy. Messages. Notifications. Comments. Reposts. At first, I didn't even understand the scale. People I'd only seen once in my life were writing to me. Great aunts. Nephews of my grandmother's friends. Classmates I'd barely spoken to. Everyone suddenly knew I existed. And what they'd done to me. Most of the messages were supportive. They said it was cruel. That it wasn't right. That if you needed help, they were there. Some offered money. Some offered a place to live. It was strange. And a little embarrassing. I wasn't used to the attention. It was overwhelming. And then I opened the messages from my parents. And everything went wrong. My father wrote that I'd betrayed the family. That I'd spilled the beans. That now everyone looked at them like monsters. That I was ungrateful. That they'd done so much for me. In one message, he wrote that it would be better if I didn't exist. I reread that 10 times. Not because I didn't understand, but because inside me, I still hoped I was wrong. Mom wrote differently. Colder. She demanded I delete the post. She said I'd ruined their reputation. That I hadn't thought through the consequences. That people don't need to know the truth. Especially if it's ruining others' lives. My sister Alina wrote briefly. She asked to talk. In person. Without messages. I reread that message longer than anyone else. Because I didn't know what to feel. Anger. Resentment. Or nothing. I blocked my parents. I just did it. Without hysteria. Without regret. It was strangely easy. As if I'd been waiting for this moment. A couple of days later, they showed up at my school. I was leaving after class and saw their car. My heart sank. They came out, shouting my name. My friend stood next to me. I didn't ask. They did it themselves. It was the first feeling of protection in my life. My parents demanded that I go with them. They said I had to, that I was a child, that I didn't understand what I was doing. I said I wouldn't go. Then my father lost it. He told the truth. That they needed me back because after the fast, my grandparents had given me an ultimatum. Either they mend their ways, or the inheritance would go to Aunt Ira. Money was more important than me. Even now, I turned around and left. I didn't listen to the end. I didn't argue. I just left. And, at that moment, I realized something else. I didn't want them to pretend to love me anymore. I wanted them to just disappear. After the scene at the school, I felt like I was in a daze for several days. I seemed to be staying with Aunt Ira, eating, going to school, doing my homework, but inside, everything was switched off. It was as if someone had put my life on autopilot. I caught myself staring into space and couldn't remember how I got there. Aunt Ira didn't interfere. She was simply there. Sometimes that's more important than any words. Alina's message was still on my phone. She wrote again. Then again. Without pressure. Without accusations. Simply, please talk to me. I was angry. I felt like she was part of the problem. Always had been. Even if she didn't do anything directly. She simply existed, and that was enough to make me feel like a lost cause. But the more time passed, the more I wanted to hear the truth. Not the one my parents had been feeding me for years, but the real one. I wrote to her that I wasn't going to my parents' apartment. She responded almost immediately. She said she was currently living with her boyfriend, that it was hard for her to leave the house, that if I wanted I could come over. I thought about it for a long time. Then I agreed. Not out of a desire to make peace. Out of curiosity. Their apartment was small. Rented. Nothing like our home. Alina looked different. Not the confident darling I remembered. She was tired. Frightened. Very lively. She started talking right away. Apologizing. A lot. She said she knew how it all looked from the outside. That she saw how I was ignored. How no one cared about my grades. How my birthdays were passed over. And that she did nothing. She said that this was her greatest shame. That she was comfortable. That she was afraid to go against her parents. That she thought that if I didn't complain, then I was fine. It cut me. Because I really never complained. I was used to keeping quiet. I thought if I was quiet, they wouldn't kick me out. Mistake. Then she said something I didn't expect at all. My parents had never discussed my eviction with her. Not a word. She learned about it from my post. She was shocked. She didn't ask for my room. She didn't ask for me to be removed. Their plan was different. They wanted her to stay with them longer. They wanted to control her. To help her like parents. And they didn't like her boyfriend. They simply used her pregnancy as an excuse. After my post, they had a fight. A big one. Alina said it was the first time in her life she'd yelled at them. She said she wouldn't go back to a house where they treated children like that. She packed her things and left. They called her ungrateful. They said she was destroying the family. It was all the classics. I listened and felt something change inside. Not right away. Slowly. I didn't completely justify her. But for the first time, I saw not a symbol but a person. A fellow hostage, just in a different role. We talked for a long time. About childhood. About how we were pitted against each other. How I was told I was my own person, and she was told she was the pride of the family. How it destroyed us both. At one point, she took my hand and said that if I let her, she wanted to be my sister. A real one. Not just on paper. I didn't cry. But I felt very close. A couple of days later, Aunt Ira said my grandparents had called her. They knew everything. They were furious. Not at me. At my parents. They apologized for not seeing me sooner. For believing the pretty picture. They said that if I wanted to live with Aunt Ira, they would support me. Financially. Legally. In everything. And then my parents showed up again. In a letter. Not angry. Cold. Manipulative. My father wrote that I had behaved rudely. That such things are decided within the family. That I had bullied them. That my colleagues had found out. That my reputation had been damaged. Not a word about my feelings. Not a word about my birthday. Only them. Always them. I realized I'd passed the point of no return. I didn't want to explain anything anymore. I wanted everything to be official. So they couldn't just come and take me away whenever it suited them. Aunt Ira said she was already consulting with a lawyer. That it would be difficult. But possible. For the first time in my life, I felt like someone was fighting for me. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And it was almost as frightening as it was hopeful. A few weeks passed, but it felt like years. Time stretched out, became viscous. Every morning I woke up at Aunt Ira's and for a few seconds couldn't remember where I was. Then I remembered. and everything inside me simultaneously tightened and relaxed. It was a strange house. Quiet.
No screaming. No constant tension.
No one here pretended I wasn't there. And this made things unusually difficult. I realized I'd gotten used to living in a background state. And then suddenly they gave me volume. Lawyers. Paperwork. Phone calls. I heard snippets of conversations. Guardianship. Temporary residence. Transfer of rights. These words sounded terrifying, as if I wasn't a person, but an object. But each time, Aunt Ira told me directly, if I change my mind, we'll stop. It's my choice. No one's forcing me. And this again pulled the rug out from under my feet, because I'd never had a choice before. My parents were silent. Almost. Occasionally, letters arrived. No longer angry.
Reserved.
My father wrote that the situation has gone too far. That everyone has gone too far. That's not how you resolve family conflicts. Not a single "I'm sorry." Not a single "we were wrong." Only irritation that things hadn't gone according to plan. Then my grandmother called. She spoke sternly, without sentimentality. She said that she and my grandfather had set conditions for my parents. Either they voluntarily give up custody and are no longer allowed to contact me without my consent, or they lose most of the inheritance. The money would go to Aunt Ira, because she was the one currently fulfilling the role of parent, without responsibilities, of her own free will. I listened and felt emptiness. Not joy, not triumph, emptiness. Because at that moment it became completely clear, if it weren't for the money, they wouldn't have fought for me. Never. I was a bargaining chip, a pretext, an instrument of pressure, and it was disgusting. A few days later, Aunt Ira returned home with the documents. She silently placed them on the table. She sat down across from me. She said that my parents had signed everything, voluntarily, without trial, without any scandal. They simply chose the option with the least amount of losses. She said this calmly, and then she added, "Now you officially live with me." I nodded, and that was it.
No tears. No smile.
It was as if something inside me had switched off. Only that evening, as I lay in bed, did it wash over me. Not with grief. A strange longing. For what I never had. For the parents who could have been. For a home that could have been safe. I realized that even when you get rid of the bad, you still say goodbye to hope. And that hurt. Alina called the next day. She knew. She said she was proud of me. She said that if I let her, she wanted to be there. Without pressure. I said that I wanted to. And it was true. I hardly think about my parents. Sometimes it hits me when I see someone being picked up from school, or when I hear someone complaining about their mother. Then a sharp pang appears inside. But it passes. Because now I have proof that it wasn't me. It never was. I began to get used to the silence, to normality, to being asked how my day was, to the fact that someone was interested in my grades. This turned out to be harder than living in ignorance. Because now, if I'm hurt, it's obvious. And hiding it is no longer possible. Sometimes I think about that morning, about that gray Tuesday, about the bags, about the car that left without waiting for me to enter the building. And every time I catch myself thinking, if it weren't for that day, I would still be living in an illusion, enduring, hoping, waiting for a love that didn't exist. They chose money. I chose myself. And perhaps this is the first correct choice in my life.